A senior US official says the minerals deal makes no promises about future security guarantees for Ukraine. That's a key issue for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who spilled out his red lines ahead of the talks. He said the deal will not repay any money the US has given to Kyiv during the war so far. And he said he wants to clarify if Ukraine can still count on US weapons deliveries. The Ukrainian leader considers the deal only a framework, but Mr. Trump says Kyiv has every reason to sign it.
The minerals agreement will provide the basis for a more sustainable future relationship between the United States and Ukraine, and thus stimulate the long-term prosperity that will help the Ukrainians rebuild their country. It's been demolished.
But multiple US officials and experts describe the minerals deal as a shot in the dark for Mr. Trump.
That's because it's not clear how much mineral wealth Ukraine has and if it's worth exploring. Nick Paton Walsh has more.
We very much need rare earth. They have great rare earth.
A moonshot for Ukraine's survival. Talking peace suddenly means talking about places like here, this lunar landscape. A titanium mine struggling under the Russian bombardment of Ukraine's power grid, sometimes with only 3 hours power a day.
Зараз ми не знаємо, як буде відбуватися наша робота навіть завтра. Бо щодня ми бачимо, як руйнується енергосистема України. І наше підприємство зараз дуже нестабільне, і це приводить до дуже високої собівартості нашої продукції.
$500 billion. That was the sum that President Trump initially thought Ukraine might be able to pay back to the United States, in his words. And here you're going to sense the challenge, really, because this place, potential is certainly there, but they say they desperately need investment. These machines are so old. And yes, so they say they would welcome American money. The pressure to get money out of the ground is enormous, as are the questions as to whether the astronomical sums Trump thinks are here can match the money to be made under this sprawling sea of unknown potential.
And who knows what rare earth is worth, but at least it's something. And who knows what it's worth? Who knows if they even have it?
It was, at first, Ukraine's idea. President Zelensky selling their mineral wealth in November, perhaps too successfully, as part of a victory plan for more aid. Showing reporters maps here. They claim 7% global production of titanium. Lithium isn't mined yet, but they say they've 3% global reserves. They say they're in the top 5 of graphite reserves and have some actual rare earth metals. The initial framework deal doesn't specify what it covers, mentioning only relevant resource assets that will be further described in another agreement. Yet the White House has been specific about some resources.
There's a foundry that processes aluminum in Ukraine. It's been damaged. It's not at its current capacity. If that is restored, it would account for America's entire imports of aluminum for an entire year.
Waltz is probably referring to here, an aluminium plant in Zaporizhia, mothballed when filmed here a decade ago, still struggling and hit by a missile during the war. The US perhaps a little too eager to take. Ukraine with no choice but to give, in a hugely complex deal that may get messier still when it runs into the cold, hard ground truth of where Ukraine is at today. Nick Paton Walsh, CNN, Irshansk, Ukraine.
Here with us now is former CNN Moscow Bureau Chief Jill Doherty and CNN Global Affairs Analyst Kim Dozier. Thank you both for being here. Kim, I'll start with you. What are you looking for in this coming Zelensky meeting here?
Well, I'm looking for two men who are going to be playing nice for the cameras, even though they have a lot of animus towards each other. But I'm also looking for Trump's team knows that the way to get to him is through commerce. And I think they've sold him this deal in terms of, we'll be able to make money off of this. You can tell your base that you're getting the money back for the U.S. investment. But down the line, it's not Ukraine that has to lobby for security guarantees. if Trump wants U.S. companies to go in and exploit whatever U.S. geological scientists find in terms of rare earth minerals, they're going to demand a secure, stable security environment. And that means supporting whatever peacekeeping forces, be they British or French on the ground, continuing with the intelligence, surveillance, the geospatial intelligence that the U.S. is currently providing Ukrainian forces to keep that place safe and keep the Russians out.
And, you know, Jill, Trump has called Zelensky a dictator, even if he tried to walk it back, and says he trusts Putin won't violate a peace deal. And then you have Zelensky, who likely feels the opposite on both fronts. But also, he's here looking for reassurances that the United States still has his back. Where does he start with Trump? And even if Trump trusts Putin, is he not alone in that, at least among allies?
Well, I think, Zelensky really has a difficult task. So I think in a way, he has to reset the relationship with President Trump. He has to make sure that Trump understands that this is life or death for Ukraine. And I think he probably will want to undermine that faith that President Trump seems to have in President Putin, because that's kind of key here. President Trump is saying, I think Putin will keep his word. And why? Because we both went through the so-called Russia hoax, which was the interference by Russia in the 2016 election. And so, I think of this, Omar, almost as kind of a triangle. You've got this deal, which is the minerals deal over here, really not a major part. When you look at it rationally, it shouldn't be a major part of what we're talking about. Then you have Ukraine. How do you solve that? And then you have Trump's relationship with Putin and resetting the U.S.-Russia relationship. So there are a lot of, moving parts to this. And Zelensky is going to have to try to really, establish this relationship, keep it going, but also stand up for his country. And that's going to be very, very hard.
And Kim, this of course comes on the heels of French President Emmanuel Macron, who visited. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also visited the White House this week. The goal was clearly to see if there was any sort of progress towards some form of security guarantees from the United States if there is any peace deal struck with Russia. I mean, despite all the handshaking and smiling this week, did Europe make any substantial headway into that effort this week?
Well, the two positive meetings by the French and the British leaders mean that at the very least, Trump has embraced the concept of peacekeepers, NATO peacekeepers on the ground inside Ukraine. At least those are NATO countries, if not flying under the NATO banner. And Russia, while the Moscow spokesman and others have said, no, we would never allow any NATO forces inside Ukraine, has gone quiet on that in the past few days, as if to understand the Brits and the French have won this round, and they're going to bring it up at the negotiating table next and not be too public about it, because anyone who defies Trump publicly, he lashes out at, as Zelensky discovered to his peril almost 10 days ago, when he said that that Trump seems to be susceptible to Russian disinformation. So right now, it looks like things are going in the right direction for Ukraine, but it is a very delicate balance. And the only thing that I think Russia is trying to get out of it at this point is a seat back at the world table on the G7, et cetera, investment and lifting of sanctions. But I got to just mention, the Trump administration just extended some of those sanctions against Russia for another year. So that leaves Moscow with something to play for.
Yeah. Jill Doherty, Kim Dozier, really appreciate the time and perspective. Thanks for being here.